Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a new thing that I was always thinking about doing. It's called the Stories of MCC. And I wanted to interview different people from the MCC community, just tell their stories. And this being February and Black History Month, I thought that I would start off with interviewing some African-American brothers and sisters and also some African brothers and sisters in our community. Historically, during Black History Month or throughout the year, we would invite African-American Muslim speakers to speak on issues of race and culture. But I thought it would be a good idea to actually talk to MCC members or MCC regulars that come to MCC and speak on, have them speak on their experience. So my first guest for this little podcast is going to be Brother Mustafa Ali. I've known him for the last 10, 15 years. We've worked together at MCC. He's done work for MCC. I believe he was on the board at one point, but also chair of the Jummah committee at one point. But I wanted to start off with interviewing Brother Mustafa. Jazakallah khair, Mustafa, for coming to this Zoom podcast. So to say. And I want to just get started off with you and just kind of tell me about your background. Where you grew up, family, anything that you want to expound on.
Well, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. Jazakallah khair. Well, I grew up here, and actually I grew up in Maywood, which is the suburb right outside of Chicago. I always like to say first generation from my parents migrated from the South, which was a racially charged South at that point. So, she migrated here at the age of 18, fleeing the KKK and the Jim Crow laws that were prevalent during her time from the South. So she made her roots here in Chicagoland. But again, she settled in Maywood.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And then you kind of grew up in Maywood, probably went to Proviso West?
No, I went to Proviso East.
Oh, Proviso East.
Yeah, I went to Proviso East. I was part of those back-to-back state basketball championships, by the way.
Who were
Mike Finley, Sherelle Ford, Donnie Boyce.
Okay.
For those of us who were pretty good at the basketball who couldn't make the team, we played football. So, played football with Ray Buchanan, Richard Buchanan, and two NFLers. So, we have a long history of sports in Maywood.
So you kind of dated yourself there a little bit.
Yeah. At 91, 1991.
All those guys were good basketball players back in their day. And football players as well.
And football players. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what made you move to the north side? How long have you been a regular at MCC? Why did you choose MCC to be your kind of, I guess, wherever you live, you'll probably go to that mosque. But why did you choose to live in the area that you lived and come to MCC as opposed to maybe any other mosque in the area?
Well, at the time, MCC was the closest masjid to where I lived. I lived in Jefferson Park. Actually, I still do reside in Jefferson Park. Me and my family. So MCC at the time was the only masjid or the closest masjid to where I live at. So I chose MCC, or MCC chose me. Since then there's been a couple more massages that have opened up, but I still am attached more to MCC.
Nice. Okay. So now, as an African American, how do you see a connection between being an African American and being a Muslim? Do you see an inherent connection there, or is it something that you just fell upon? Or, historically, we see a lot of African Americans, converting to Islam or reverting back to Islam, or they've been Muslims their whole lives. But do you see a connection between your lived experience as an African American as well as being a Muslim?
I do see a connection, and I think, just speaking personally, from my experiences, coming up here in the Chicagoland area, close west suburb area, you see a lot of connections between Islam and African American community. I mean, obviously, with the first generation of Islam, Bilal radiallahu anhu, he was like the I guess the connector when we talk about the Africans and African Americans who kind of revert back to Islam. So, you know, growing up here in America, it's always racial tension and inequality and that stuff. But when Islam is, you know, one of the tenets, it's really, you know, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that, you know, there's no difference between the Arab and the non-Arab. And, you know, the piety, the one who's most piety is closest to Allah. I think as an African American, those really like hug your heart more than anything. So there is a big connection between Africans and African Americans to Islam.
Okay, thank you. So now MCC prides itself on being a diverse community. And you know, we are in theory, we are welcoming to all, but the reality of it is that, you know, a lot of it has to do with location. Being on the north side, there probably isn't that as many African American Muslims or African Muslims that there is probably on the south side of the city or the western side of the city. And there's a lot of first generation South Asian and Middle Eastern Muslims that come to MCC. So that's the majority of the population. I guess the question for you being a regular at MCC, what would you like to see the masjid do with the African American community, how they can bring on a lot more African American Muslims into the masjid? You know, the drawback is going to be that the majority of the South Asian or first generation Middle Eastern people are saying, hey, we're the majority, so they have to cater to our needs. I guess the question would be, how can we do a better job of catering to the needs of the African American Muslims that are in the area?
Well, I think first we have to identify what we're looking at, right? We're looking for African Americans in the neighborhood. So we have to have some sort of like open house or meet and greet pre-COVID days, and there's ways we can work around that now still to invite those, you know, that targeted audience that we're looking for. So I would say maybe like, you know, open house, right? Open house, sort of speak, or meet and greet the African Americans or the Africans around the MCC and North Side, Northwest Side communities. I think that's a good way. Maybe reach out to some of those masjids that are West and South Side, and they do have members that live Northwest or North. So there's a couple different ways you can kind of target that demographic. But I would really say even social media these days, right? Because everything is, we have a Zoom call right now. So I think social media would help to kind of attract some people. To say MCC is opening their doors to have some kind of event or just say a roundtable discussion, and really ask the people who you're trying to target or draw to the masjid, what would make them want to come visit MCC or be a part of MCC?
Yeah. So this is a two-part question. One is, as a Muslim, how do you navigate the African American non-Muslim community? You know, taking into someone that, you know, you saw what happened last spring and summer with social injustice. A lot of Muslims from the non-African American community have, you know, always have a little bit of a, you know, challenge dealing with, you know, groups such as Black Lives Matters and other social justice groups. While, you know, African American Muslims kind of have to, they're probably in better tune to kind of address those issues as opposed to other Muslims.
Well, I think from a personal standpoint, again, growing up here in America, being born in the kind of western suburbs, and I clearly remember, you know, having to walk to or ride your bike to Westchester or to Oak Park or Melrose Park, you know, and being kind of chased out those neighborhoods, saying, get out of here with the N-word, right? So, and, you know, going through your college career and professional career, being, you know, I guess, these racial issues or situations, having personally experienced those, or you're too young, or you're a little too dark, people will listen to you. Just all this stuff over the years, it kind of paints a picture, right? So I think the African Americans, most males have been pulled over by the police. It's just the way it is, right? You get your license, you're gonna get pulled over, right? And you have a story of how that encounter went. So I think when it comes to you have an inbred disposition when it comes to speaking out what you witnessed personally, what your parents have told you, how they fled the South from the KKK, how you couldn't look at a person, a white person, in the eye, or else you would be killed, or if not jailed, it would be beat to death on the street, and it was perfectly legal. So you hear all these stories, which were true stories, and you're hearing it right from your parents. So it means a lot more to you. So when you grow up with these stories and your own personal experiences, when you have a chance or calling to kind of, talk about the injustices the other people, Blacks, have faced recently or over time, you want to speak up and be a part of that, because at the least you want to do, right? You speak up. Islamically, the minimum you want to do is speak up, right? If you can't change anything by your hand, you speak up.
Yeah.
So I think as a Muslim, we're obligated to at least say something. And so that I guess that's that.
So second part of that question is, now as a Muslim, African-American Muslim that comes to MCC, which is predominantly Asian or Middle Eastern, how do you as a Muslim navigate the different cultures that you have to interact with, which is probably different from growing up?
Actually, yeah, but not so much different, because in my professional career, I was always the youngest and I was always the darkest in the room. It started at very, very early age. So from the professional side of things, I was used to being the only African American in the room, or maybe two at the most. I was always used to being the youngest in the room, right? And so, besides talking or demonstrating your business acumen, you had to demonstrate that you weren't illiterate, or you didn't have these social skills or etiquettes that people think African Americans lack. So I think coming to the masjid, and I think actions speak louder than words, right? Alhamdulillah, we're Muslim, but the actions, people judge you by your actions. You walk in, you spread the salam, and again, everybody, the media and sometimes personal experiences kind of shape people's opinion about a topic or a certain person or a certain segment of a society, especially African Americans, because you look on the news channels, either there's carjackings or there's shootings or there's game banging, there's drugs, or there's mass incarcerations, and there's really never a story behind how things got this way in certain segments. So I think as a Muslim, as a Black, judge me by my actions, because I can't be responsible for the whole Black society. I'm only responsible for myself and the folks in my household. But I've always said that, just give me a chance, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, even, in this deen, Islamically. You can judge me, but treat me as I treat you, right? If I'm coming and I'm approaching myself and I'm holding myself in having good mannerisms, show me the same respect back. A lot of times you get that, but unfortunately, it's just the life. So a lot of times you don't. So you have to learn how to deal with that, and just keep it moving.
Yeah. All right. So on top, along with that, you have a 3-year-old son.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. And he is a biracial child.
Yep. Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, so the question now is, now you're going to be raising him just like your mom raised you.
Yeah.
How are you going to raise him? Obviously, he's biracial. He's Muslim. How are
Alhamdulillah.
you going to raise him as a child growing up? Do you, like, obviously you have to, this is a talk that you probably had with your spouse, raising him as an African-American, as a half African, half Black, half Indian child. Like, how do you use him as your, what's his identity going to be as you raise him? First, obviously Muslim, but then what?
Well, I think, in my mind, we have to have him understand his heritages, right? He's two. He's, alhamdulillah, is half African American and half Indian. So, the conversations me and my wife have a lot, obviously, he's going to learn English. You have to go to school, you have to, but he needs to learn Urdu also, right? So, alhamdulillah, right now he starts to pick up both. So alhamdulillah. So I think as far as like a kind of check the box kind of thing that we get on a lot of the insurance forms, or pick an ethnicity.
Yeah.
I think especially these days, and the more time goes on, they're gonna have to add a couple more boxes on those.
Sure.
But our plan is to raise him. One, he has to recognize that he's Muslim. One, and two, he'll respect and understand the heritage of being Indian. What entails, what comes along with that, with those traditions and heritages, if I can say that. And same thing as being an African American, right? So I think, again, just from my mindset, because my wife's experiences are her experiences. I can't speak for her experiences, but my experiences are mine, and I'm pretty sure she can't speak for mine because she haven't had those experiences.
Yeah.
But what I can say to him, I like to be honest and open, as my mom raised me and dad. When you walk around in America and you have dark skin, people don't like you. There's a lot of there's a lot of prejudice when it comes to African Americans or dark people or brown people in America, and it is what it is. And I think the more I just give them the fastball and the straight truth instead of dancing around it, I think the more I'll prepare him to deal with the prejudice that he's going to face.
Yeah. Inshallah, he grows up to be a good kid.
Inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. So as we wrap up, I don't want to take too much more of your time and also the audience's time. As we wrap up, we're going to go back to basketball a little bit. So just recently in the news, you might have seen like the Dallas Mavericks, Mark Cuban, the owner.
Yeah.
I think there were some issues of him saying that we're not going to do the national anthem anymore before the games. I guess they haven't been doing the national anthem, but now it's become news.
Yeah.
About 4 or 5 years ago, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf came to our masjid and spoke on his issues and his trials and tribulations within the NBA and just in his life. And how he did not stand for the national anthem, and there was a big controversy. He potentially got blackballed from the NBA. And I remember, and this is where I want to kind of, I wish I asked you this before when you actually raised your hand and you asked this question. And this has more to do with, and maybe you can address this a little bit more, but when I see you at the masjid, we kind of say salam, we talk about our families and stuff like that, and maybe some religious issues. But I'll see you post on social media about African American issues. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of interesting for me to see at that meeting when Mahmoud Abdul Rauf was at MEC. You asked him a question. You asked him a serious question about, when he did not stand up for the national anthem, and now it's become kind of like mainstream. It's kind of become normalized. But when he did not stand up for the national anthem back in 1995, you asked him, how did the other Muslims in the NBA respond? how did some of the other African Americans respond? And his response, and I think what you were kind of getting at, is that some of the Muslims at that time that were playing in the NBA didn't agree with his stance.
They were superstars at the time, correct?
Yeah, there were superstars that were Muslims that did not agree with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf's stance at that time, and they spoke out against it. I think that you were trying to allude to something. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wanted you to maybe kind of expound on that issue, or why you asked that particular question at that time to Mahmoud Abdul Rauf.
You know, Bismillah, it always bothered me how come he was left by himself, right? So at the time, and the reason he didn't stand for the national anthem, it had nothing to do with social justice as far as racial injustice towards blacks. It was purely a religious standpoint, right? So when people call him the Kaepernick before the Kaepernick, it had nothing. Those were two different issues. His stance was Islamically, right? Because one nation under God, the national anthem goes on to some other stuff that Islamically he didn't agree with. We don't agree with, so he decided not to stand. So at that time there were a bunch of superstars. There's always been a bunch of NBA superstars who are Muslim, and so I kind of asked him. I was like, did any other Muslim approach you? Did they support you when you decided to kind of protest or make dua doing the national anthem instead of having your hand over your heart? And he kind of sidestepped the question. And body language, I still think, and again, I can't speak for him, but my thought is, I still think that bothers him a little bit, right? Maybe a lot. But I kind of asked him. I said, you had NBA superstars, you had champions. Not to put him on the spot, but at the time he was the most notable because they just had won back-to-back championships, or were in the process of winning the back-to-back championship, which the brother played for the Houston Rockets. I don't want to say his name because I don't want to keep doing that, but he was the center for the Houston Rockets, Hall of Famer, back-to-back champ. And Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, he was like, no, nobody really said anything to me, and I just, again, not to put, inflect my feelings upon him, but the conversation I had with him in the hallway before this, and the conversation right there, I can kind of tell that, it was kind of miffed. Just to say it short, he was kind of miffed.
Without knowing anyone's intentions, you asked that question. Did you have an understanding of why you asked that question?
I did. I did, because it wasn't to put anybody on the spot, because I really wanted to know if any of the other Muslims, or even non-Muslim African Americans, anybody had approached him and said something to him at that point. And the answer I got was no. So I mean, I really, maybe behind the scenes there was stuff going on that the TV didn't want to talk about, or the media didn't want to present. But the answer I got from him, and the response I got from him at that point, it really wasn't a conversation, or conversations behind the scenes, at least from what he said, that were going on to support him for that not standing for the national anthem.
Yeah. So as we let you all, the good thing is that 25, 30 years later, you see in general, even with like Muhammad Ali and other, freedom fighters or activists, they end up being on the right side of the truth. And, you see 25 years later, this has become like mainstream topic, and it's not even that big of a deal anymore. But anyway, last question. I want to let you go before I let you go. We're in Black History Month, and inshallah, the next we intend to do this probably for the next 3-4 weeks. Just interview some regular MCC brothers and sisters. But does Black History Month have any significance to you in general?
You know, it has a lot to me. Again, you know, when you're raised and the educational system growing up, it was a lot, well, I would say a little bit more detailed when it comes to Black history in general than it is now. I would say now it's whitewashed. There's so many people who kind of scrub off things from the history books in school, and who really want people to get narrow vision or a whitewashed vision of what happened to Africans who were forcefully brought to America. And, you know, a large majority of them were Muslim, and, you know, and made into slaves and killed and persecuted, didn't have any means of owning land. And, you know, when we talk about even recently, 1950s, you know, we still talk about the Jim Crow laws. And, you know, I always explain to brothers in the community who weren't born here, I said, you have to educate yourself. I'm not saying you have to get a doctorate or a master's or a bachelor, even just have some education about the societal events that happen in America. And you can get a better frame of mind of why things are the way they are now. So when you look at the African American history, you know, we're the longest surviving minority group here in America, right? Over 400 plus years. And 1968, you know, we finally were able to so-called vote, right? And 1967, that's when interracial marriages were legalized in America. So can you believe it? I told my wife that fact. You know, if it was 1966, legally we couldn't get married because it was against the law. 1967, that's when America, all 50 states, said it's legal for interracial marriages, right? Even though Islamically it's permissible, but we have to go by the law of the land, right? So there's a lot of other things when we talk about the KKK, the nooses hanging from the trees, 1950, 60, even less now. Even, you know, in the last 5 years, there's been cases of, you know, African American, you know, being found hung from the trees. And so, you know, just to get to the point, and I always tell my wife this story. This is the way my mom grew up. So you're living in the South, right? You're living in Mississippi, South. And back then it was legal to lynch. It was legal to lynch. And lynching is a word for a legalized killing or murder, right? Of an African American. Imagine you're sitting down at the dinner table. You know, mom, dad, because back then the government didn't break up the Black family yet. Not yet, but they had they did a really good system that did. But anyway, this was before that. And kids, mother, father. So you had a whole family. And there's a rock or something comes to the window, right? And then the wife rushes to the window, the husband rushes to the window. And there's a mob standing outside the house. White hoods on. And there's a cross burning in the front yard, right? So you got this big mob. So the mob storms into the house, drags the husband out, drags the wife out, you know, and the kids or whatever, but usually the wife. And you know what happens to women most of the time when they're overpowered by men, right? And so they hang the husband from the tree and they burn the cross. And these guys are, in my mind, cowards, right? They have these white KK hoods on, Ku Klux Klan hoods on, right? And so this didn't happen one time, two times, three times. This happened like hundreds of thousands of times between the 1920s and 1960s or 70s, even recently as last year, they found bodies hanging from the trees, African Americans in the South. So my wife like, oh, that didn't happen. I said, read the books, right? Because most immigrants, you're going to go to college, you're going to get an education, but a lot of the laws that benefit you or all of us now, it came from the sacrifices or the trials and tribulations that happened to the African Americans. Affirmative action, right? Where'd that come from? When it looks like, a company has a certain designation to have a broader representation of their workforce, of society. Where'd that come from? So, there's a lot I could talk about, but I always tell people, it was legal to kill Black people by lynching them. And you couldn't call the police because the police, most of those guys had the hood on themselves. So who are you gonna call, right? So when they say, how come Blacks don't like the police? Let's look at the history. Where did it start from? Where did it start from? Then you go from that, and then you go from a televised lynching when you talk about George Floyd on TV, 8 minutes and something seconds, right? Obviously, your intention was to subdue a person and kill him, and he was successful, right on TV. So there's a long list of things, examples I can talk about, but Black History Month, talking about Harriet Tubman, how she freed so many slaves, all the Black inventors, the Black Wall Street, Oklahoma City, right? Oklahoma City was a thriving Black community, had its own Wall Street. Black millionaires in the 20s. And the Caucasian and whites burnt the city, bombed the city, because, oh no, they're too progressive. So there's a lot, and it was legal. So there's a lot of history when you says, does Black History Month mean to me? Meaning it means a lot to me. Because again, never forget where you come from, right? Never forget where you come from. Because it's easy to go back to that, or it's easy for people to make the laws to send you back to being nothing.
I think one of the things that I've learned as I grew up is that when you are going through the school system, you learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the good things about social media is that it's exposed me to a lot more. So, for example, Black Wall Street, we never learned that in school. We never learned that in school. Even like someone like James Baldwin,
no.
I just started discovering him in the last 10 years or so, where I probably never would have heard of him in school. Like if I just went through like a regular school system, and some of the great like clips that you see on social media of things that he would say then that is still relevant today. On that note,
Marcus Garvey, he wanted to like tell African American, let's go back to Africa. He was the first billionaire, the Black billionaire on record, right? Let's go back to Africa. The Tuskegee Airmen, which are in the news now. Who were they? What they do? How many combat missions successful combat missions that fly for the military? But when they came back to America, they didn't have any rights. And they were intentionally injected with syphilis to see the effects syphilis would have on the body, and weren't treated. Yeah. Right? So there's so much things when somebody tells me how come Blacks are so angry? I mean, you walk around like a nutcase. You really have to compartmentalize things, and some folks are better at it, and some folks have some work to do. But alhamdulillah, I think Islam has really, I'm certain Islam has given all of us the tools and the remedies to compartmentalize the things that this dunya gives us.
Yeah. Well, last thing I want to say before you leave, like I said, one of the important things that I wanted to do was talk to just regular musallis of MCC instead of bringing in a scholar or a professor to talk about these things, because these are things that is common knowledge to you and stuff that you've experienced. And it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary to think that your mom is you're just one generation removed from the 1960s or the South, you know, the Jim Crow laws. And it's not that long ago. And I think that it's important for us to realize that, you know, the history that your mom faced was not that long ago.
No.
So,
no,
yeah.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to let you go. Jazakallah khair. I think we went a little bit
yeah.
over our time, but I think this would be beneficial to our community. And inshallah, we'll see you guys next time. I'll see you at the masjid sooner or later.
Inshallah.
And inshallah, we'll be back next week with another one of our regulars of MCC to talk about their experiences. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.